Hello, everybody. I'm Julie Wiskirchen from the Authors at Google team here in Santa Monica. And today I'm very excited to welcome Peggy Orenstein and Kaveri Subrahmanyam. And I'd like to thank, first of all, Yalda T. Yules from the Children's Digital Media Center at LA, who helped us arrange this event. And I also wanted to introduce Patricia Greenfield, who's here, who's the director of the center. If you guys could wave to everyone. Peggy's here to discuss her new book, Cinderella Ate My Daughter, Dispatches from the Front Lines of the New Girlie-Girl Culture, which I hear is going to be making an appearance on the New York Times bestseller list this weekend. She's also the best-selling author of Schoolgirls, Flux, and Waiting for Daisy, and she's a contributing writer to the New York Times Magazine. Her work has also appeared in the Los Angeles Times, USA Today, Vogue, Elle, Parenting, O, the Oprah Magazine, More, Discover, Salon, and The New Yorker, and she contributes commentaries to NPR's All Things Considered. Kaveri is the author of Digital Youth, The Role of Media in Development. She's a professor of psychology at California State University, Los Angeles, and the associate director of the Children's Digital Media Center. Kaveri has been researching the developmental implications of children's use of media for nearly 20 years. She has published extensively in academic journals, as well as co-edited several special issues about digital media and development. So please join me today in welcoming Peggy and Kaveri.
Okay, so let me start here. I really enjoyed reading your book, and as the title suggests, it focuses on the all-pervasive girly-girl culture that targets little girls. So for those in our audience who might not have already read the book, why did you choose to write on this topic, and what set you off on this particular journey?
I just have to say, first of all, I'm feeling so old media sitting here. Like, she's reading my credits and I'm thinking, oh, God, I'm like, you guys must think I'm a dinosaur. So the short answer is I have a daughter. And I was, I think it's really hard to, who notices what's going on with kids unless you have one? So I was going along, and I had my little girl, and I was raising her thinking, that I don't want her to feel like there's anything she can't do because she's a girl. I don't want her to think there's anything she has to do because she's a girl. And then she went to preschool. And as if by osmosis, she had memorized, within a week, all the names and gown colors of the Disney princesses. And I had never heard of a Disney princess. And meanwhile, we're going around town, and I live in Berkeley, so, the waitress with the piercings and the tattoos gave her breakfast and said, here's your princess pancakes, and the lady at CVS said, would you like a balloon? I know what color you want, and would give her pink. And finally we went to the dentist, one of those like high-priced pediatric dentists, and she said, do you want to get in my princess chair so I can sparkle your teeth? And thought, honest to God, do you have a princess drill? I mean, what is this? And I just did not remember from when I was a little girl that every little girl had to be a princess and be swathed in pink for the first 4 years of her life, or 5 years. And so I went on this journey to try to figure out what this new pink and pretty meant, when it started, why it started, and whether it was protective of sexualization or whether it was priming girls for it. And I think, where it dovetails with what you're doing. I look at girls from infancy to sort of through the tween years, and the last chapter in the book is about social media, where I take all the wonderful things that you and Adriana and such say and squish them into, this big. But it's I think part of what's going on with girls in particular, but all of us in general, is this idea of the performance culture and the ways that I was looking at girls, but I think you could look at it from a lot of different slices. They learn to define themselves from the outside in instead of the inside out, which for girls puts them in a particular set of risks, but I think is where we intersect.
Absolutely. I think one of the things that we are seeing with all of this new media, especially the newer interactive media, is that there's so many opportunities for self-presentation. And, one of the things that Turkle wrote about, I think 20 years ago, was, how, what does it do for your identity development, if you will, when you have all these opportunities? And, fast forward 20 years, you have, Facebook, for instance, where you can pretty much put whatever pictures you want. And as Adriana has shown on MySpace, you go online, you get feedback, you get validation from your peers. So the question is, what does it do for their identity development? Now,
Right.
one of the things I talk about in my book is we're kind of at the descriptive stage. We know what they're doing. We have described what they're doing. We've really no idea how it's impacting.
What the implications are.
What the impact is.
Yeah, yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah.
In terms of, what does it do for your long-term identity development?
Mhm. And I think, at this stage, then, what is important for people like you and people like me to do is to start conversations so
Absolutely.
that implication is considered. I don't know that we can know what it is, and I don't know that you can ever say. I mean, people always say to me, "Well, it's not like if you wave a magic wand when you're 3, you're going to be sexting when you're 15." I mean, that's not what it's not A plus B equals C. But
Right.
there's a lot of research on girls and identity, girls and femininity, girls and kind of the externalization of sexuality. And we were talking a few minutes ago about one of the things that I thought a lot about when I was working on this book and looking at the culture of pink and pretty and the culture of, connecting dots from like the animated Disney princesses to the flesh and blood ones, Miley and Lindsay and all of those girls. Now I said that and it completely went out of my head why I started saying it. Let me think about that for a second. But it was about the difference between sexualization and sexuality.
Mm-hmm.
And that one of the things as a parent and as a thinker that became a guiding principle for me that made some of the choices easier was distinguishing between those two and recognizing that sexuality is this very organic thing that we're trying to instill in girls that comes from within, that connects you to your desire, that empowers you, although I hate that word, to say yes or say no, that fosters intimacy, that fosters reciprocity. And sexualization is about performing your sexuality for others. And one of the things when I was doing the Facebook chapter,
Mm-hmm.
it's really easy to look at girls and victimization.
Yes.
But while I was doing this chapter, and we're going to talk about bullying and that sort of thing, looking at all of that, one of my friend's sons got emailed to him, he's 14, a photo by one of his classmates of her naked from the waist up. And she called me up and said, "Oh gosh, I'm trying to tell my son that girls aren't playthings." And then this girl, emails this to him.
Absolutely.
And is that, what does it mean? And is there some way that for girls that's a sense of, shows a sort of progress, that they could be embracing their sexuality, feeling better about their bodies, despite the fact that they're now losing total control, and he could email it, like in the shampoo ad, to 2 friends, to 2 friends, to 2 friends.
Right.
Or what, and when I talk to researchers, and I'd be interested to know as a media researcher how you think about this, but when I talk to researchers on sexuality and desire, what I got back was that for girls, that sexual entitlement and sexual agency were themselves becoming objectified and becoming the new kind of have-to-do performance. You had to project yourself as a sexually entitled young woman, but it wasn't going back to connect them to an authentic desire. It was just something that they were supposed to put out there.
Right. I mean, I think, again, there isn't a whole lot of literature on these issues, but if you look at the literature on pornography, for instance, individuals who do consume pornography do, adolescents, for instance, they do have greater preoccupation with sex. They do have more curiosity, more, and they're more permissive, if you will, in their attitudes. The question, of course, what we don't know is which is the cause and which is the effect, because a lot of this research is what we call correlational. So we know that individuals who watch a lot of pornography have these attitudes as well. What we don't know is the preoccupation with sex causing their access to pornography, or is it the reverse? So I think all of this objectify, what do you call it? What did you say? Sexual
A sexual entitlement as a performance, or as
performance. I
yeah.
think what it is doing is that it might have some implications down the road in terms of girls' views about intimacy, their expectations for relationships, how they carry out these relationships. So I think absolutely, as parents of girls, these are issues to be concerned about.
Well, and boys, you're the parent of a boy as well, right?
Right. And I don't have a whole lot of conversations with my son about these topics because he's very private and he really doesn't like to have these discussions. But when I did see the Philadelphia DA prosecuting boys who had transmitted the messages that they had received, he prosecuted them, I believe, for transmission of pornography. Yeah. That's when I had the conversation. I said, you know, you might get pictures from girls, but you really should delete them. And he looked at me in total exasperation and told me, Mom, I'm not an idiot. But so I heaved a sigh of relief because it just seems like a lot of kids, when you think about these technologies, they really don't think about the implications. You know, there's a lot of over-disclosure going on. Mm-hmm. They forward messages. They copy and paste their instant messages that they have with friends. They forward it on. So they really don't think a lot about what they do with new media. So I do think it's a challenge for parents. And a lot of times parents are not thinking about these issues as well. So one of the things that research has shown, at least with the earlier generation of chat rooms, for instance, parents who had conversations with their kids about meeting strangers, giving out information, their kids were much less likely to carry out high-risk behaviors online. So that is something, and when parents didn't have those conversations, if teachers had those conversations, then those kids were significantly less at risk. So these conversations that we have are important.
Well, I suppose because otherwise it's a tacit approval in a way, too. If you don't comment, I mean, I know that from the research on media literacy, that if you don't point out something, then it comes off as a tacit approval of that thing.
Correct. I think when you look at parental mediation strategies, that is one of the strategies that you can use. Now, those strategies do work with television, when you can say you're all going to sit down and watch a show together. But when so much of their new media use occurs in the privacy of their bedroom, or with their little cell phone device next to them in their bed, how do you then know what your kid is even consuming?
Right.
You know?
Now I'm depressed.
I'm worried. My son will be 18.
I mean, but it seems that, you know, I also don't want to demonize the new technology and new media, because I think there's also so many things that it's opened up and so many ways that kids can find affirming messages and alternatives to what used to be a kind of mono-mainstream message that's really valuable for them.
Right, absolutely. I think, for instance, there is literature that suggests that kids are coming out, gay teens are coming out at younger and younger ages. And, you know, we do think, for instance, that access to chat rooms, access to sites where they can meet other people struggling with the same issues has helped them. And it's interesting because, you know, a couple months ago you saw the incident in New Jersey, Tyler Clementi.
Right.
The teen at Rutgers who was, you know, sort of quasi-bullied, I guess, through his roommates videotaping him. Now, it's interesting because here technology was really the tool by which this individual was harassed, if you will. But immediately after that, there was that whole YouTube movement, if you will, about, I forget the name, it's not coming off the top of my head.
It gets better.
It gets better, thank you. So again, technology can also serve as a pathway, if you will, as you said, to open up and these alternative possibilities. And then when you think about, for instance, minorities within minorities, so you think about gay youth who are, you know, African American or Latino, these individuals, I think, have even more options with technology. So I think definitely in terms of access, messages, these new tools are, you know, positive. But like any tool, they can be put to good or ill.
Right.
So, okay, I just want to talk a little bit about the history again, because one of the, you know, in the second chapter we are talking about pink, you know, the pink, what was it, pink drills? No, I'm just kidding. Pink stuffs, pink blocks and whatnot that you get for girls. Now, this cleavage, this pink is for girls, blue is for boys, was not always the case. And even 20 years ago when my daughter was little, I don't feel it was as strong as what you're portraying.
No.
And in fact, I was telling you, the 1950 Peter Pan movie, in fact, had little Michael in a pink jumper.
Yeah, you wouldn't see that now. And it's much actually more than that. If you go back 100 years, all babies wore white. They wore white dresses because we didn't have Maytag back then, and we had to boil clothes to get them clean. So we didn't like to have colors. So there were no colors. But, you know, all babies wore dresses. They all wear white. And then nursery colors came in, and they were pink and blue. And then when they were assigned to sex, pink was assigned to boys and blue was assigned to girls, because pink was considered to be the more pastel version of red, which connoted masculinity and the god Mars and, you know, and strength. And blue was associated with faithfulness, constancy, and the Virgin Mary. So it was, even as late as the 1930s, Lord & Taylor, the New York department store, did a poll of its customer base and found that a full 25% of its customers still said pink is for boys, blue is for girls. And I just don't think any, I don't think you'd get even 1% at this point.
At
And,
this point.
and in addition to, you have Cinderella and Sleeping Beauty, the Disney movies, they're in blue. And now,
true.
I didn't think about, I hadn't, till you pointed it out, remembered about, is it Michael? Michael's in pink?
Michael, I think, yeah, the younger brother,
and
the younger child.
the little, yeah, the one in the little feety pajamas. And somebody sent me pictures of Michael Reagan in the 1960s wearing an all-pink suit. So, I mean, if Ronald Reagan's dressed in this pink pink.
That would not happen to you.
Yeah. So it wasn't really until the mid-'80s when marketers recognized the profit-making potential of hypersegmentation, particularly with kids, that pink and blue fully came into, pink particularly, not blue so
yes.
much, but pink came into its own as being all defining of girls' younger experience. So, it's just a color. It's just a color. It's a very tiny slice of the rainbow, though. And to me, I think of this time once when, how when you're driving with your kids and you get all the good stuff because they're in the back seat talking and you're in the front seat and eavesdropping. And I was taking my daughter and a friend of hers to go scootering in the park. And her friend had a pink scooter and a pink Hello Kitty helmet. And my daughter had a silver scooter and a fire-breathing dragon helmet. And the other little girl said, your helmet's not pink. It's not for girls. And my daughter said, well, it's for boys or for girls. And the other girl kind of, looked skeptical. And I thought, just in that little interaction, there was so much going on about what the expectation is for girls, what the mandate is for girls, about what might happen if you don't follow that. And just this, even as girls are doing better in so many realms, the pressure to define themselves through appearance and play sexiness and just this little pink box that starts when they're young that gets smaller and smaller and defines girlhood increasingly through pinkness and princesses and then, spa birthday parties at 4 and makeovers and, the whole thing. And it's too narrow. I mean, that's, I just want my point is to just say it's too narrow and it's getting narrower.
Absolutely. Now, now I know you have, tried to have those mixed multi-messages, both that girls can do anything. And, I know as a parent of a girl, I did the same thing. But then they come to preschool and it's like you've lost you've lost all the ground that you've made. So what is it that parents can do and, what do you think that parents can do to combat some of this?
It's humbling to be a parent, isn't it?
It really
And I always, I like to say that in this book, I really present myself as a fellow traveler. I'm not, and I am inconsistent. I am hypocritical. I am contradictory. Because that's what it means to be a parent, right? And I'm like not a tiger mom. I'm like a dog on 4 roller skates mom, I think is what I am. But so I think first there's 2 answers to that. The first is to understand why that happens in preschool. And what happens is that kids don't understand the whole penis-vagina thing. And let's just for the sake of it, can we just for the sake of this conversation say a penis makes you a boy and a vagina makes you a girl, even though that's not universally true. So let's just go with that, okay? So they don't get that. And they think that you could grow up to be either a mommy or a daddy. And you basically want to stay what you are. And so it's not, if it's penis and vagina, it doesn't make you a boy or a girl. What makes you a boy or a girl? Well, barrettes. Barrettes make you a girl. Wearing a princess dress makes you a girl. And so that's why when your daughter hits 3, you suddenly cannot wrestle her into pants because she needs to say, I'm a girl, I'm a girl, I'm a girl. So it's natural for kids to do that. It's natural for them to start segregating by sex. It's natural for them, much as I hated to hear it, to go for stereotypical toys. And the difference in toy choice is one of the biggest gender differences across the entire lifespan. And it's universal, it's true when they do tests on monkeys. Boys go for the balls, girls go for the dolls. That said, so that's very humbling to me as a feminist writer. everything I've been, fighting against for the last 30 years. Apparently, can't. But that said, there's also a lot of research on the neuroplasticity of preschoolers' brains and the ways that the inborn differences between girls and boys, when left to flourish in their separate cultures, become big gaps. Lise Elliott writes a lot about that in Pink Brain, Blue Brain. And so anytime kids play across sex, it is healthy and important and good for them cognitively, psychologically, emotionally, and for their future relationships. And so when the market is hyper-segmented, when your daughter is sitting there in her pink room, in her pink dress, reading Pinkalicious with the pink Scrabble set that says Fashion, and I swear to you that exists, and the pink Monopoly set where the hotels and the houses are replaced with boutiques and malls, that exists. It's very hard. It's very hard to make those, to reach across those lines. And it is, and I didn't know that. As writing this book, that was one of the things that was most surprising to me as a parent, that it really changed how I thought of my daughter's friendships.
But it's interesting because I think new media have really given an opportunity for girls to somewhat break away from some of those chains, because if some of our early research on chat rooms found that, for instance, and of course chat rooms are passé now, but girls were making many more requests for partners than boys. At the same time,
What does that mean?
Meaning, when back in the day when you went into chat rooms, one of the things we found was very common was these conversation attempts to find someone to talk to.
Oh, right.
And oftentimes they then went away into a little private message room. So when you looked at it, what you found was that girls actually made, although boys made many more explicit sexual comments, and this is something you expect, you also found that girls made many more partner requests. And so it almost seemed like this new environment, if you will, back then, which was new, where you had a certain amount of disinhibition, if you will, let girls sort of get away from those more traditional gender roles.
It emboldened them.
Yeah, but at the same time, what's really interesting is you also see regular gendered patterns illustrated. So, for instance, when blogs were very popular, they were overwhelmingly
Way
female.
back then, last
Way
year.
back then, yes. 90% female. I
Right.
was pleasantly surprised. The boys would start the blogs, but they just would not go back to
But
them.
aren't blogs kind of like keeping a diary? I mean, that's such a
And
girl
exactly,
thing.
and that's the thing, what we have found repeatedly is that traditional patterns of play and TV preference get, exemplified online. For instance, Patricia and myself back again in the 90s wrote this chapter about Barbie fashion designer. This was a video game marketed by Mattel, and it was one of the there was a big girls game movement in Berkeley. Brenda Laurel started Purple Moon and a bunch of other companies. All of them failed pretty much. The only one that was as successful as it was Barbie fashion designer in a pink box with Barbie on the cover. And what you did was you went into the game and you made different outfits for Barbie.
Right. And that's what you do on the Disney Princess site now. If you go on, except the one, like, we love Mulan in my house.
Right.
On the Mulan page, it says something like, come back later. Or we didn't do anything on this page because they don't have any Mulan. They don't sell Mulan, swag. But they all have the same game where you go on to whichever princess you pick, and she says, "Oh, I just realized I didn't pick out my outfit for the tea party or the fair or whatever. Would you please do it for me?" And then there's this predetermined script that the kids follow, and they pick, it's like so, it seems so anti-creative. I mean, that's one of the things that concerns me about and I did want to get back to your kind of what parents can do thing, but I was looking at this research on doll play, and the way that the sales of dolls have plummeted as the enchantment with online dolls has grown. And they had, and I don't know if they were just trying to be inflammatory, but they had quotes from girls saying things like, "I like to play with online Barbie better because I don't have to make things up, and it's really hard to imagine how I would play with this doll if I have to make things up." And I mean, what is that?
I think you have to, there are, as great as technology is, and I know I'm at Google, so I'll be careful, but as great as it is, I think there are some definite downfalls. So for instance, I think, I've heard kids saying they like to paint online. for instance, color online. And you have to wonder if that's taking away some of their creativity. The other thing I've noticed is this, what we say, always connected, never alone. I mean,
Yeah.
kids, I'm on a university campus. They're in a line and they're on the phone. My daughter is walking across buildings and she calls me. It's like this, almost never have this ability to just sit down, sit back, reflect, and observe people. And you have to wonder about those lost opportunities,
Right.
if you will, for interaction, for observation, for growth, if you
For
will.
loneliness,
For loneliness.
solitude.
And that's not, solitude is a good thing once in
Yeah.
a while.
Well, I'll tell you, I struggle. I mean, I don't know about you guys, but I struggle sometimes. I'll be sitting with my daughter, and it'll be 10 minutes till swimming lessons, and she'll say,
Absolutely.
"Mom, can I have your iPhone?" And I'm like, "No, you sit there and be bored." And I think, why am I imposing boredom
Right.
when it no longer needs to exist? Is that a good thing? I mean, I really struggle right now with the notion of boredom.
Right.
Is there a value in it, or is it just an obsolete concept? I mean, that's getting further afield, but this is the stuff that
That's an
I think
interesting.
about.
It is, because I often tell my kids when I was growing up, we had black and white television, one channel, and I grew up in India, so once started at 6, ended at 8.
Can I
And so-
offer you a cane? You must be
and it was
ancient.
great, and I read a lot, and I don't seem, whereas it seems like if there's nothing new to do, our kids are getting bored. So I think that is an important skill to develop as parents. I think to encourage almost.
I guess I don't know, but but I also see in this then that parents feel sort of disempowered by all of that to sort of cut it off. To just say, I mean, I had this almost an argument last night in an event that I did about saying no to something that your daughter wants, and I was like, well, so what if she wants it? Just say no. She said, well, how do you explain that to her? I said, I don't.
No is no.
Just say no. Why is
That's
that
your
so
tiger
hard? I know. Well, that is. I mean, in that way, I'm with her. Like, just say no to the 15th princess dress. She
Right.
really doesn't need it. But when I think about what parents. That said, I had this moment in the Los Angeles airport a few years ago, on the Southwest corridor, where there's a newsstand, and for about 3 years they had a rack of dolls called Thai girls. And I always call it girls with a Z, which always indicates a sort of diva girls power to me. I am woman, see me shop kind of girl power. And so Thai girls dolls are like, you guys know what Bratz dolls are? They're like Bratz dolls but plush. So they're like Bratz dolls meet Groovy girls. And my daughter, she was 4 years old, and she saw those and just went, Mom, can I have one of those? And this is one of these moments where I'm hypocritical, inconsistent, and contradictory. I just, something in me snapped. And I just went, no, you are never, ever, ever getting one of those. And she said, well, but why not? And I said, because they're inappropriate. And, she was like, but why are they inappropriate? And I just had this moment where I thought, I don't want to scream because they're slutty, that's why, at my 4-year-old.
Right.
And I just got so dang sick of these teachable moments. You always have these teachable, you're supposed to use these as I mean, I don't want my whole life to be one big teachable moment for my kid.
Absolutely.
But I also felt suddenly like I was put over this barrel, and that I was being pushed into this position that was untenable, where I was being forced to say no all the time, and believe that was going to result in my daughter thinking she had more choices. And that's not going to work. So at that moment, I sort of had this epiphany and realized I have to find things that I can say yes to, whether it's online or offline, that reinforce that desire she has to celebrate being a girl in a fun and joyful way that is not linked with appearance, with pre-sexualization, with sexualization, with hyper-marketing. And that put me on a totally different path. And it's some work, but on a different path as a parent, to just think more in a bigger and more creative way about alternatives that would, that I like to say, that would fight fun with fun and be just as good for her.
Right. I think it's interesting what you're saying, because I think all of these media choices, new media, Disney prints, all of them really have impacted family relationships, family dynamics. I mean, look at new media, for instance. Kids are often the expert. Now, I think it's changing as, the younger generation, as they become parents themselves. But if you look at a lot of families with teens and preteens almost, the kids are going ahead in terms of the technology. And so to some extent, they do set the conversation. I think they are the experts. And it's interesting to think about a situation where your traditional family roles are reversed. You know, historically, parents have always been the ones with the information and the power, if you will, and that's not, it's become much more egalitarian.
That's very interesting. So what do you do about that?
I don't know. I think it's again, you know, as a parent, I guess it's interesting. I think the challenge really is to keep up with the technology. I suppose. I don't know. What do you think?
You know, well, I find, I mean, we're in a room with really techno, I mean, you and you guys are all so, you know, you're techno people. But when I talk to parents like me,
right,
you know, they don't think about technology as integrated in the same way into their lives. So they think about it as this other thing in their kids' lives. And they're really focused on TV or movies or toys. But the online stuff is still kind of hazy and, you know, both in terms of what its impact is and also just the nature of the marketing changes when you're on. I mean, I was writing that kids under 6 can't distinguish between advertising and programming. Well, that's irrelevant now because it's the same thing when you're online. You know, it's embedded. None of us can distinguish between advertising and entertainment anymore. So that's a whole new world. But I guess, you know, we think, we meaning me and not all of you, that that online identity is a separate thing and almost a contained thing. Not that it's an extension or an integration with your offline identity.
But you know, I think, and that's a very interesting perspective, but if you look at the developmental literature and what we have found at our own center and as well as research coming from other areas, is there's a lot of connectedness between online and offline worlds, especially for young people. And so I often think, you know, reporters will often call me and say, you know, is this virtual world versus the real world? And I always ask them, I said, you know, who are we to say what is real? You know, for a lot of young people, the distance, if you will, the psychological distance between themselves and what they do with these new technologies is very fluid. And, you know, what is not real to us may be very real to them. And I think that there are those historical cohort effects, if you will, where you're going to see different generations react very differently with these new media. But again, I think the challenge then, as you say, is what is it that we can do as parents?
Right. And I think, I mean, to me, I kind of liken it to when I was a kid and I'd take my mom's shopper's charge, which was the credit card that we had in those days, and hop on the bus and go to the mall. And that, you know, and that was where I negotiated my identity, and that was where I sort of played with these different ideas of selfhood and acted it all out. And, you know, my mother didn't go to malls. You know, that was not something that existed when she was, because I'm from Minneapolis and we had the very first mall, I would like you to know. And I went to that mall. And it almost feels to me that it's useful to look at the online world as the new mall for kids, that it's where they're, you know, negotiating identities, where they're meeting peers, it's where they're meeting strangers, it's where they're encountering products, it's where they're sort of hitting our contemporary world and trying to figure out what it's about?
I think so. I think, for instance, you see a lot of exaggerated behaviors as well. It is widening their networks. So I like to think about Facebook as widening your networks, giving you opportunities to interact with more people than you could have than before, with, you know, just your face-to-face context and maybe even the telephone. I think the bigger question to me is, are all of these widened networks, if you will, is it making us spread ourselves thin? Is it, you know, are they the same? I mean, having a few relationships that you invest in depth, are they giving you the same, you know, are they going to be giving you more support than, say, a wider set of networks where you are more intermittently getting in touch with them, but then now you have more opportunity for support and resources? That's, I think, to me, that's the big question with some of these new.
Well, right, and the invisible Adriana, who we keep talking about. I know, but she's not on camera. I mean, she's here, but she's not there. She is in the back, blushing. Yes. I mean, I don't know. Maybe you want to talk about this, but your research on branding and narcissism was really interesting. Do you want to talk about? Do you want to come up here and talk about that for a minute? Come up. Because I mean, your research was among the most meaningful pieces of information that and perspective shifting pieces of information that I learned about. So,
Yeah. So Oh.
See.
So unexpected.
Just stick to the format.
Right.
Well, yeah. So I'm a graduate student at UCLA and at the Children's Digital Media Center. I guess one of the first studies we did was with MySpace. So that was back when MySpace was the social networking site. And a lot of it's just qualitative, but we're trying to figure out we've also done some now correlational studies of kind of relating to the last question you said. But one of the first things that struck us was this idea of identity and how one creates a sense of self and an absence of physical reality. So one of the things, I don't know if you're talking about this, was creating social legitimacy. So the more people that are commenting on the kinds of things that you're posting, the more that it gains a sense of reality, at least through consensus building. So that's something that we're interested in. But as you mentioned as well, there's this fluidity from on and offline, and so often participants in our studies talked about that. Mm-hmm. You can't be this completely different person. It's not like. So when we're talking about Facebook and social networking sites, it's not so much about promoting some kind of false identity, but maybe it's an opportunity to craft your ideal identity and manifest into some kind of social reality, the kinds of people that you hope to be.
I think this continuity is something that we have really found in our research, that young people in particular really seem to bring the same kinds of themes and issues and people into their online lives as in their offline context. So I think that's really the interesting.
Yeah, well, what interested me about your work was the ways you described young people crafting identity externally as opposed to creating it internally. And shaping it based on the response of their 622 BFFs, and hitting the like button or whatever. That's a really new. I mean, kids have always, cared about what others thought and whether they're wearing the right clothes or whether they're popular. But that invisible audience that was in their head is now actually present, in a certain way, 24 hours a day, and when. And then for girls in particular, that involves negotiating this fine and ever-shifting line between being sexy but not too sexy, because they get positive feedback, right, in their identity if they're sexy, but then negative feedback if they tip over the line, the invisible line into too sexy. So it's that same old negotiation that girls have always gone through, but now in this very public online way, and all of that. I just found that really fascinating.
One of the things I wanted to ask you was, if you look at the number of women engineers, for instance, it's flat, and it's been flat for several.
Zippo, yeah.
It's still like
7% or something.
Yeah, 80-20% or something, and it gets, the gender cleavage, if you will, gets even worse as you go further, along the spectrum. So my question is, to what extent, how do you think these, from what I know you went to a lot of different places, and in your, as you wrote this book, in your investigation, you went to, the American Girls show, Trade the Store, and you went to trade shows. How do you think all of this
Toddler beauty pageants.
Right, the beauty pageants.
So you don't have to. Miley Cyrus concerts, so
yes.
you don't have to.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, how does all of this, how does it set girls on these more traditional pathways, if you will, and why is it maybe, and this is not always, this sort of cleavage that you see here is not necessarily the case everywhere.
No.
I was telling you, for instance, in India, we have many more women engineers than you have here. It's certainly not as much, as few as here, but many more. So, this.
Well, I didn't really think about it in terms of, well, I guess I did sort of in terms of traditional paths. I was looking more at not so much at their career choices and such. Though that said, there is some interesting research on that I talk about when I'm talking about the princesses, because I'm sort of saying there's no research that says if you play princess, you're going to have an eating disorder, or you're going to grow up and but there's a lot of research about the impact of feminine stereotypes on girls and women, and the exposure to feminine stereotypes encourages the embrace of them for both girls and women. And there's all these, there's always these, I always wonder who funds these studies. I hope the person who did the study isn't watching this, but so there's I was looking at these studies of basically stereotype vulnerability. So they would take college-age women and men and divide them into 4 groups and put them into dressing rooms in a mall. And then they would have one group of the women and one group of the men put on a bathing suit, and the other group of women and men put on sweaters.
Oh, I see
And
that.
then they would have them take a math test. That's what I like to do in a bathing suit. And they found, lo and behold, that for the men, it didn't make a difference what they were wearing, how they scored on the test. For the women, those who were wearing a bathing suit, their performance was depressed. And so that would indicate that a consciousness of body and feeling, a consciousness of stereotype and all of that depresses women's performance in non-traditional fields.
And yeah, because when you look at college campuses, you have there's so many more women coming to colleges. For
Right.
instance, if you look at, MIT, for instance, if you look at the acceptance rates, if you will, they're very different for males versus females. So there's no question that there are more
No question.
women at colleges, but you still have the difference.
Well, and there's so much to celebrate in girls' lives right now. I mean, they're doing wonderfully on the playing field. They're in leadership positions. They're going to college at greater rates than young men. And so, as a parent and as a journalist, I found it intriguing and confusing to think that this existed side by side with the fact that the pressure to define themselves through appearance had not abated and was actually growing younger. So even as that was happening, you had little girls in elementary school. Since 2000, the rate of girls who say that are more concerned about their body than their schoolwork, their weight than their schoolwork, has gone up. The percentage of girls wearing eyeliner or mascara ages 8 to 12 has doubled since 2008. I don't know why the percentage of girls, 8-year-olds wearing eyeliner or mascara is not 0. Walmart just rolled out. Did you guys see this at Walmart last week? Rolled out a age-defying line of cosmetics for 8 to 12-year-olds.
Oops.
Oh yeah. I am serious. And so, right, you guys all go, right? So this is the thing, though, is that we all go, and a year from now, those kind of trend-setting girls will start wearing it. And 2 years from now, some more girls will start wearing it. And 5 years from now, we'll be saying it's natural for girls, as they said in the Wall Street Journal article, to want a little enhancement when they're 8 and not want to leave the house for the playground unless they're wearing the right lipstick color. So that's how things sort of migrate down and become naturalized rather than natural.
Right. Now, I just want to shift gears just a little bit. I know your book is about girls, but what do you think, just for, in terms of your observations, what about boys? How do you think they're getting impacted?
Well, like I said, I think it's really detrimental to boys when they can't play with girls, when they feel excluded from girl play, and the taboo against boys who choose to do things or appropriate colors that we consider to be feminine in our culture right now still remains huge. And I think that both speaks to the sort of depth of homophobia and also the idea that when girls choose to do something that we consider to be more masculine, we think of it as reaching upwards.
Right.
And when boys do something that's considered to be feminine, we think of it as a loss or as reaching downwards, an inferior thing, and we don't want them to do that. And that's why the worst thing a boy can still call another boy is a girl. So I think that reveals something really important, and it's sad when there's a lot of things that used to be considered to be gender neutral, like art, music, that are now considered to be kind of for girls. And so those are great losses for boys. Plus boys, are going to grow up presumably and work with and even possibly marry these princess girls. And do you guys want to work with and marry
Simpson.
princess girls? That you can now, there are Cinderella, that you can get married in a Disney princess wedding gown now. They have them for grown-ups. I'm kind of hoping they do, next is the Snow White coffin. That's what I'm waiting for. All the way up. And we should probably take a few questions, getting late. Yeah.
Questions now.
I didn't mean to make you stay here if you don't want to. You can, but you don't have to. Yeah.
Anyone have questions?
This is a follow-on to something that Peggy says is very interesting discussion. So why don't we worry about male? That's actually well. Anyway, you brought it. You started talking about this, but I want to take it a step further. Why not worry about male stereotypes as negative?
Oh, I think there's all, it's a perfectly legitimate thing to be concerned about. And there's a great book called Packaging Boyhood that I recommend to parents of boys. I just happen to have a daughter, so my book's about girls.
A follow-on to that, why aren't we putting equal effort into getting boys to do traditional female roles? It seems to me that the liberation of women and their freedom to go to school, have wonderful careers, really depends on men learning to do their share at home with childcare, parenting, right, housework, and so forth. But yet, why aren't we talking more about that?
Gets into my second book. I mean, 2 books back. 2 books back, I wrote that book. It was called Flux, and it was looking.
Sorry, I missed it.
That's all right. It was looking at women's choices and men's roles, and it was really clear in that book that couples who shared household and professional labor more equally were happier, that their kids were doing better. I mean, there was some great, and that the women I interviewed who were in the workforce and thriving and doing well and feeling like they could excel had almost universally husbands who were equal partners in the home. So, yeah, but then I would go and I went to talk to a group of medical students in Philadelphia at UPenn, female medical students, and they had just come back from a panel thing for them on how to balance work and family with their medical careers for women doctors. And I said, wow, that's really great. That must have been really interesting. How many men were there? How many of your male classmates? They just kind of looked at me like I just, dropped from the planet Romulus and just said, none. And I said, well, I get it. They're going to have their own panel later, right? No, And I thought, I just thought, what do they think is going to happen when they get married to those guys, which presumably they will, And so, yeah, I mean, that's absolutely vital. And yeah, again, it was a different book, but yeah.
Hi, I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit about what you think about the computer engineer Barbie, which uses kind of these princessy, girly tropes to promote something that's traditionally not. Right.
Barbie. Barbie's so quaint now, compared to Bratz and Monster High. She's like, that's got me begging for Barbie. I'll tell you one thing, you can't find her anywhere. You try to find computer engineer. I mean, it's almost irrelevant because you can't find her in Toys R Us. You can't find her at Target. You have to you have to go to a specialty place to find computer engineer Barbie. She does not really exist. Yeah. So, Barbie used to be all kinds of things when I was, like in maybe the early 80s. She had actually Barbie's supposed to be a teenager, but so it's a little weird. But she had all these careers, and I think that she did serve a certain fantasy purpose in that. And then as her audience drifted younger, because she's part of the kids getting older, younger marketing construct, that she was originally for 9 to 12-year-olds. And then she drifted younger, so now girls are kind of done with Barbie by the time they're about 6. And as that happened, the fantasy changed, and she became much more fairytopia Barbie, mermaid Barbie, and stopped being career Barbie. Now she's just basically a baby doctor. That's what you can find, and a fashionista. So, I don't know. I thought it's one of those sort of ambivalent things. Is that meeting girls where they're at and encouraging them to do something they might not ordinarily do, or is it locking everything into that pink box? And you could probably argue it either way. But either way, if they're going to make a computer engineer Barbie, I would like to have seen her in a store just once. I don't know. Do you have a feeling about that?
No, actually, no. It's just, I guess it's same thing that we saw with the fashion designer too. I mean, they have the icon that they then try to parlay into other domains. But really, I think what you're getting at is you have to have this midpoint meeting, if you will, between the kids' interests and what's being marketed. And if they don't take the trouble to do the marketing, then you're not going to see it in the store, and it's not going to have much of an effect either way. But it's really interesting. I don't know if you saw the New York Times had a story 2 days ago that Disney's now going to the maternity ward.
Yes, I'm actually mid working with NPR on this on a commentary. Yeah. Well, yeah. I didn't know what we're talking about. The Disney's. They have a new line called Disney Baby that is, they're modeling it after the success of the princesses. And what they want, they've realized that they have a big hole in their consumer products, that they're not, they don't have anything for they have not hooked the 0 to 3-year-old crowd yet. And so they are going into maternity wards and going into hospital rooms of women immediately after birth and giving them a free Disney stretchy, those things that babies wear, and signing them up for the Disney Baby email. And the executive in charge of this, who is the same guy who invented Disney Princesses, said this is a beachhead for the newborn market that they are intending to expand out from. So it's only $9.95. You can make your child into a billboard within 12 hours of her birth. Yeah, you're on it. You can't get them yet. If you go to the site, you can't quite get them yet. It's going to be a little while. But they're going to have 8. It's going to be, yeah. So, I don't know. In other countries, you are not allowed to market. I mean, this is not exactly marketing to children. It's marketing to adults to turn them into marketers for children. And at the most vulnerable time in your life. So that your child will, wear the Disney onesie and go into the Disney princess or whatever the boy equivalent phase might. But they haven't hooked boys in the same way. And then, go along to Hannah Montana and go along to High School Music and whatever is going on at that time. Other countries don't allow marketing to children under 12. And they certainly wouldn't allow marketing to people right after they have given birth. So I think there's a point where we got to put our feet down on that, our collective foot down. So, do you want one more question? Sure. Yeah, you guys have to go to work, right? This is your job.
So I was wondering what you think about how much of this is trying to fight something that you find to be specifically pernicious versus just how much of it is a parent feeling like they want their child to do one thing and the world wants them to do another, and through every phase of the child's life, you basically are sometimes, capable and sometimes underpowered to do it.
Can it be both?
Sure.
I mean, why not both, right? I mean, you have a magnitude of marketing and channeling towards your kid. I mean, it's like the difference, when you were saying before the one TV channel, it's the difference between having 5 TV channels on a black and white TV and having a satellite dish, and that is a lot of messaging, a lot of marketing in an unprecedented way to little kids and probably more to girls than boys because girls and women are bigger consumers. So I do think that's pernicious. And I also think that we're in constant negotiation with our kids about what they want versus, what we want for them. And sometimes those things dovetail and sometimes they don't, and as, from a marketing perspective, there's always an attempt to say that magnifying desires is somehow less coercive than instigating them. We just gave them what they wanted. I don't really buy that. But I think you do have to have the conversation with yourself and your fellow parents and your community, and also start laying the groundwork when your kid is small for what comes in the house and what doesn't and what your values are, so that when they get older and you are in more active negotiation with them conversationally, as we all will be, as all adults always will be with children, you can have those conversations in an intelligent, useful way.
Follow-up. So, little background, I have 2 daughters, 10 months old and 2.5 years old. And just at the beginning of this journey, my approach has always been, you only say no to the things that are really wrong. So unless you can actually explain to them why it's wrong, you don't say no, because then they'll learn, oh, you're just saying no. So I want to be able to set myself up to have the right impact on them when they're 15, 16.
Right,
When the
that's what
things
I'm
are
saying.
actually dangerous.
Right.
And so I'm not going to fight the battles now because I don't want to alienate myself as an
Well,
authority figure.
I guess I would say a couple of things to that, though. One is your child also has to get used to you laying down rules and accept that you are the authority figure who does that. And you can't always, you will find when your children get a little older, if you wish you could explain everything maybe, but you're not going to, you cannot explain it. Sometimes you just can't. Sometimes you just, it's either you can't because it's too hard cognitively for them to get it, or, you know, like if you try to say, oh, honey, you don't really want that Disney Princess Cinderella toothpaste because they're just trying to shill you, you know, into buying some more toothpaste that you don't really want. They're not going to hear that. You know, they hear, Cinderella, toothpaste, you know? And there are great minds and billions of dollars trying to tell your daughter that these are the things that she wants, and that isn't really a free choice at that point, and that isn't really, you know, letting her make the choice or letting her make the decision. If you don't sort of set out some rules and some ground rules and some values for her, the marketplace raises her for you. So I think you do want to have, you don't want to say no, 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 no. You want to say yes judiciously. And like I said, you also want to provide alternatives. Like, for instance, one that I always like to say is when my daughter was little, we read a lot of child-friendly Greek myths. And so rather than being a princess a Disney princess on Halloween, she chose to be Athena, the goddess of war and wisdom. Athena wears a really cool outfit, you know, and she's got a different vision, a different idea, a different message about femininity that would not be out there in the marketplace if we were just shopping, but is really worth her hearing and knowing about. And that was about finding something that I wanted her to know about and say yes to, rather than just responding and reacting to the things that were out there. And similarly, you know, the kind of tsunami of pink and sparkle was getting on my last nerve. So we went out and got a stack of cheap white T-shirts when she was, I don't know, 4 or 5, and a lot of dye. And we temporarily ruined my washing machine, and we made a whole range of colored T-shirts for her together. And what was great was that then she went to school with them, and they were things she had made, and she felt really good about having, you know, this unique experience of making her own clothes, and that, you know, sort of gave them a cachet and a mystique that other kids picked up on, and also gave her the experience of being an individual and a creative individual, and not just, you know, I'm a girl so I wear pink, you know. So I think there's ways that you can say no while saying yes, and that's part of your job when kids are little too. But what? Nature abhors a vacuum. And I think that, and honestly, I think that part of the reason this has happened is that as women, we have talked a lot about feminism and public achievement and such with our daughters, but we haven't really wrestled with femininity much and what that means to us and what that means to them. And nature abhors a vacuum, and the marketplace ran in and filled the breach. So.
Yeah, I think the bottom line is you're saying is that as parents, we really have to set the limits and set the tone.
And start the conversation. So thank you guys so much for having us.
Thank you guys.